The oil-stained hand of a Japanese naval officer clutched a shattered plank, his body drifting among burning debris that stretched as far as the horizon. Smoke rolled across the waves, carrying the stench of fuel and charred flesh. He blinked against the salt that stung his eyes and tried to understand how everything had collapsed so swiftly. Only days earlier, he had boarded his vessel at Rabaul with thousands of comrades, filled with confidence, discipline, and the unshakable belief that their mission would shift the balance of the Pacific War. Now, clinging to splinters on the Bismarck Sea, he realized that the world he had trusted the traditions of honor, the certainty of victory, the assurances of propaganda had been obliterated in fire and steel. 2 days before, that same sea had carried a formidable convoy. 8 transports and 8 destroyers, their decks packed with 6,900 elite soldiers of the 51st Division. These men had been hardened in the battlefields of China, veterans drilled in the Bushido code that demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and courage without hesitation. They marched aboard their ships with polished boots, confident that they were the spear meant to pierce New Guinea and reclaim the initiative for Japan. Officers gave speeches about duty and destiny, reminding their troops that the emperor himself expected victory. Morale was high. Even the younger recruits carried themselves with pride. The Japanese believed they were about to deliver a decisive blow that would shatter Allied resistance in the Southwest Pacific. The operation had been crafted with precision at Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. Maps had been studied, escort strategies planned, and fighter cover arranged. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, seasoned and respected, flew his flag aboard the destroyer Shiryuki. He knew risks were real. War games in Rabaul had already predicted heavy losses, but to the Japanese high command, even sacrifice was a form of glory. Convoys had made perilous journeys before. Why should this one be different? What the men aboard those crowded transports could not see was that the ocean they entered was already poisoned against them. Their codes were broken, their timetable known, their destination anticipated. And in Australia, American aircrews had perfected a weapon and a method that would turn the proud march of the 51st Division into the most harrowing massacre they would ever endure. Even as the convoy steamed with conviction, its fate was sealed before the first transport left Simpson Harbor. Weeks earlier, Allied codebreakers in Melbourne and Washington had intercepted and decrypted Japanese messages, exposing not only the convoy's size, but its precise route and destination. Every secret the Japanese believed to be safe within their ciphers had already been laid bare. The Allies were not merely guessing, they were waiting. At 5th Air Force Headquarters, General George C. Kenney studied the decrypted reports with a sense of anticipation. He had been searching for the moment to unleash his crews, men who had spent months testing a radical new approach to naval warfare. The old methods, high-altitude bombing runs, were notoriously unreliable against ships that could maneuver and scatter. But Kenney's flyers had been practicing something entirely different: skip bombing. They would roar in at mast height, release bombs that bounced across the waves like stones across a pond, and strike transports at the waterline with devastating precision. Combined with modified B-25 Mitchells, bristling with forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns, these planes had become airborne battering rams, capable of shredding decks with gunfire before slamming explosives into hulls. The Americans had transformed medium bombers into ship killers. As reconnaissance planes shadowed the convoy, sending updates of every course correction, Japanese officers maintained their optimism. Admiral Kimura had calculated his escort strength carefully: 8 destroyers with formidable anti-aircraft batteries and fighter cover drawn from Rabaul. War games had predicted the loss of several transports, but still promised a chance of success. For the 51st Division, the numbers felt like acceptable sacrifice. They believed in their escorts, in their air protection, and above all, in the unshakable notion that courage and Bushido spirit could triumph over material disadvantage. The contrast was stark. On one side, Japanese confidence, rooted in tradition and valor, blinded them to the new reality of modern war. On the other, the Allies had patience, intelligence, and a weapon designed for annihilation. The convoy pressed forward across calm waters, unaware that every mile carried them deeper into a trap meticulously crafted to destroy not only their ships, but their faith in the rules of battle itself. March 2nd broke with heavy cloud cover, but by mid-morning the skies opened and the Americans struck. 29 B-17 flying fortresses appeared first, glittering at high altitude. They released their bombs from thousands of feet above, scattering chaos through the convoy. One transport erupted in a column of flame, another shuddered as explosions tore its deck apart, and a destroyer trailed black smoke as fire spread across its hull. To the Japanese below, it was the familiar sight of high-altitude bombing, destructive but survivable. They tightened formations and prepared to press on. What they did not realize was that these lumbering giants were only the opening act. As the Japanese anti-aircraft gunners fired upward, eyes fixed on the skies, a more lethal wave swept in low. 13 Australian bowfighters came roaring just above the waves, their engines howling as they skimmed the sea. The air filled with the hammering of their forward-firing cannons. Decks erupted in splinters and screams as gunners were cut down at their posts. The bowfighters did not aim to sink ships, they aimed to silence defenses, to clear the way for the final blow. That blow came moments later. Modified B-25 Mitchells stormed in at mast height, so low their propellers seemed to claw at the ocean spray. Each plane bristled with machine guns, spewing torrents of fire that raked decks clean. Then came the skip bombs, steel cylinders bouncing once, twice, across the water before slamming into hulls at the waterline. A transport carrying hundreds of soldiers shuddered violently, split in half, and sank within minutes. Another exploded in a fireball as aviation fuel ignited, casting oily smoke high into the air. Admiral Kimura's own flagship, the Shiryuki, took a direct hit to its forward magazine. In a blinding flash, the vessel disintegrated, leaving nothing but boiling water where the destroyer had once commanded the fleet. By midday, the convoy lay in ruins. 7 transports had been struck and several were sinking. Destroyers burned, listing as their crews scrambled in panic. The sea itself seemed alive with oil slicks, burning debris, and bodies thrashing in the waves. Thousands of Japanese soldiers, stripped of their weapons and their confidence, found themselves cast into the sea, clinging to wreckage. Many believed the nightmare was ending. They had survived the air raid. Surely they thought mercy or rescue would follow. But the Bismarck Sea was not finished with them yet. The worst was still to come. The waters of the Bismarck Sea churned with oil, bodies, and wreckage. Survivors clung desperately to floating planks, barrels, or whatever fragments of their shattered convoy they could grasp. Some called out for comrades, others prayed, while many stared blankly at the horizon, waiting for rescue. In their minds, the battle was over. They were shipwrecked men, no longer combatants, who expected capture or at least indifference from their enemies. But the horizon soon filled with the drone of engines returning, and hope turned into terror. American aircraft appeared not as saviors but as executioners. Orders had been issued from General Kenney himself. No Japanese soldier was to reach the shores of New Guinea alive. From the Allied perspective, these men, though helpless in the water, remained enemy combatants. If they reached land, they would reinforce garrisons and continue the fight. The logic was cold, strategic, and merciless. As the planes dropped to wave height, their guns opened fire. Streams of bullets tore into the sea, churning water into foam, cutting through lifeboats, shredding rafts, and striking men who had no weapon but their arms to keep afloat. What survivors had imagined as relief became a slaughter. Night fell, but the horror did not. American PT boats prowled the dark waters, their searchlights sweeping across the wreckage like hunters stalking prey. Wherever the beams landed, machine guns followed. Survivors who had endured air attack were mowed down in the blackness, their cries lost beneath the rattle of gunfire and the roar of engines. Sharks, drawn by the blood and chaos, joined the massacre. Fins cut the water and thrashing limbs vanished beneath the surface. For many, death came not by bullet or bomb, but by teeth tearing into exhausted bodies. To the Japanese soldiers raised under the Bushido Code, this was unimaginable. They had been taught that even defeated enemies deserved dignity, that mercy had a place in warfare. Yet here they witnessed the ruthless efficiency of a new kind of enemy, one for whom victory was not enough, annihilation was the goal. The contrast could not have been starker, tradition and honor drowned in a sea where modern war recognized no boundaries. For those who survived, the image of Allied planes strafing the helpless would haunt them forever, a reminder that the old rules of war had been swept away. When dawn rose on March 4th, the true scale of the disaster emerged. The Bismarck Sea was no longer a battlefield, but a graveyard, 40 miles of oil-slicked water scattered with bodies, wreckage, and fading cries. Of nearly 7,000 men who had embarked days earlier, only a fraction remained alive. Submarines and a handful of destroyers would rescue some, but the mission to reinforce New Guinea was finished before it had even begun. Japan had gambled on Bushido spirit and conventional escort tactics. Against modern air power and intelligence, both had proven useless. Strategically, the consequences were immediate and permanent. Never again would the Japanese risk sending a large surface convoy into waters patrolled by Allied aircraft. New Guinea, cut off and starved of reinforcements, was effectively abandoned to its fate. The psychological cost, however, ran even deeper. Survivors who staggered back to Rabaul or were pulled aboard submarines returned not as proud warriors but as broken men. They carried stories of machine guns raking the helpless, of comrades torn apart by sharks, of endless nights in seas lit only by flames and searchlights. Rumors spread quickly through the ranks. If the Americans were capable of such ruthlessness, what chance did anyone have of survival? Many soldiers swore they would never allow themselves to be captured, convinced execution awaited them. The traditional belief that honor in defeat might still earn respect had been obliterated. The Japanese military psyche hardened into a grim resolve: fight to the last man, for surrender meant only death. In the years after, historians and veterans would argue bitterly over the morality of those days in March. Were the strafing runs an atrocity or a military necessity? American commanders insisted the soldiers in the water were still enemy combatants, close enough to swim ashore and rejoin the fight. Critics pointed to the Geneva traditions that demanded protection for shipwrecked survivors. Yet in total war, law and morality bent under the weight of expedience. And when judgment came after 1945, it was only the defeated who stood trial. The victor's justice left these questions unresolved, shadows lingering over what some called victory and others massacre. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was more than a tactical triumph. It was a turning point, a demonstration that modern warfare had entered a new era where technology and intelligence could annihilate entire armies in hours. For America, it marked the rise of ruthless efficiency. For Japan, the shattering of illusions. For the world, it stood as a reminder that war had become not a contest of honor, but a machinery of destruction from which no tradition could shield the human spirit.